Other examples of polyprotic acids that we've seen in this course include amino acids, right? And so now I want to spend some time talking about structure-based questions and pH questions applied to amino acid structures. And bear with me, we'll have to draw out these structures, but I want to sort of explain, of course, for any amino acid, right, you have some carbon chain and a carboxylic acid that has a pKa that's close to 2. And you don't have to know those exact values, okay, but you should know that that's the most acidic functional group on any amino acid. The amino group is an ammonium ion when it's protonated, and this will have a pKa value that's close to 9 or 10. Beyond that, each amino acid simply differs by its substituent chain. Don't worry too much about the stereochemistry here. This is not an organic class. But this side chain, it may or may not be acidic. So it may or may not have a third pKa. I'm going to draw out 5 amino acids here and give you the pKa's of them. You don't need to memorize them, of course. And then we'll answer a bunch of questions based on them. So cysteine, they're all going to have this basic structure.